The 2020 Minority Health Film Festival offers a diverse variety of films and events that we just wouldn't be able to offer in the in-person cinema experience. But I think what really makes it unique is the focus not only on public health issues, but the issues that really concern communities of color. If you're looking for a reason to engage or to try it out, this is the perfect time. Just go to mkefilm.org/MHFF.
Hello, my name is Janelle, and I'll be moderating the Sisters Rising film today. And right now we're going to be bringing everyone on screen, and we have the co-producer and co-director of Sisters Rising Film, Lisa, Jada, Congresswoman Gwen Moore, and we'll have everyone introduce themselves now.
Yeah, should we go? Just go first.
Hey everyone, thank you, Janelle, Dr. Lubke, for moderating the panel and for everyone for joining us. My name is Willow Farrell, and this is Brad Heck, and we're life work partners. That's why we're sharing a screen right now. That's why we get to touch each other. And we made Sisters Rising with Jada, our co-producer, and we're just really honored to be here, especially with Representative Gwen Moore, one of our heroes, and just many, many thanks to Lisa Bruner, one of the powerful women in our films, for actually introducing us to Gwen Moore, because we didn't know about Gwen Moore, and we were filming with Lisa Bruner, and she said, you have to check out this Mmiw. So we went online and watched videos of her defending the Violence Against Women Act, and we were just blown away. We were like, we gotta get her in our film, and this is just a dream come true. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Well, and thank you. My name is Gwen Moore, and I am so privileged to represent the people of the 4th Congressional District of Wisconsin, which the largest city is Milwaukee, and some of the suburbs surrounding it, with beautiful Lake Michigan on the east. I am so excited about seeing this film. I grew up every single day with the Native people in my community. Milwaukee was settled by Native Americans, by our first peoples. And I was shocked to find out how little sovereignty Native people experience, especially women. And so I'm excited about this film. I'm excited about the movements we're making in Congress, because, I mean, sovereignty means nothing if you don't have sovereignty over your own body. Mm-hmm. And so thank you so much for inviting me for this experience.
Bonjour, everybody. Maingan Dorum Indigenous. I am Wolf Clan. I am from the White Earth Ojibwe Nation in northwestern Minnesota. Wasi Wagakwe Indigenous. I am Tornado Woman. My English name is Lisa Bruner, and I've had the privilege and honor to be able to be part of this film. And so, you know, many miigwitches to Brad and Willow for their love, their compassion, their vision, their heart, and the gifts that they've been given to do what they do with media. And miigwitch to Congressman Moore for, as I said before, for your advocacy, for your powerful voice in Congress when advocating for our safety. We are sovereign women of sovereign nations, and when we're not safe and we're not protected and we're not alive, neither is our sovereignty for our tribes. So thank you for all that you do for us.
Oh, that was powerful. Thank you. My name is Jada Gray Eagle. I am Oglala Lakota, and I'm so honored and privileged to be here today. This is such a dynamite panel. I am honored that Brad and Willow have asked me for my collaboration and allowed me to just put on my boss lady pants and be a part of this film. So, and this is already a good sign that we both did our red fringe game. So, thank you.
And my name is Janelle Lupke. You mentioned I'm the moderator. I'm an enrolled member of Bad River Band, Ojibwe, and I'm an IPV survivor. And I'm a recent graduate of UW Milwaukee's PhD nursing program, where I completed a research study where I did in-depth individual interviews with American Indian women living in urban areas such as Milwaukee and the Green Bay area, just really trying to find out their individual lived experiences with intimate partner violence, looking at barriers to accessing care. What are some of the reasons why some of our sisters may not be seeking care? Looking at, tensions with law enforcement. You mentioned jurisdictional issues, distrust with healthcare providers. I really, as a nurse researcher, I really wanted to find out how can I better support our women and getting more people to safety and being able to really highlight some of the wonderful resources that are out there, but also what can we do to bridge some of the gaps that still exist. So when I found out about this film, I was really excited about it, and I previewed it last night, and it just brought tears to my eyes. It's so incredibly powerful, and one of my sheroes, Sarah Deer, did a wonderful job really breaking down and explaining some of those complex legal topics that we are experiencing, especially on the reservation based in rural areas, not just in Wisconsin, but all over the country. So I have nothing but good things to say. That film was just so powerful. So
thank you.
So starting off the conversation today, I have personally some questions for Congresswoman Gwen Moore. I am so thankful for your advocacy and your energy into this topic. It's just so heartwarming to know that there's so much passion there. So what is being done, or what should be done, and what more can we do, especially with some of these jurisdictional issues? And I know the Violence Against Women Act is stalled up in the Senate.
Right.
Where are we at with some of these issues, and what's kind of on the agenda for making some progress, hopefully?
Well, thank you for raising that. I think one of the important things to note is that the Violence Against Women Act was first passed in 1994, and it was reauthorized continuously year after year with practically nothing more than a yawn. There was not a great deal of debate. Everybody agreed with it. The certain people who provided victim services agreed with it. Prosecutors and judges and certainly survivors did. But a strange thing happened in 2013 when I became the chief sponsor of the Violence Against Women Act. We talked to folks who were shared with us, people in the field, the best practices, and they said, Native women, immigrant women, LGBTQ women were not enjoying the same protections as other women. Specifically with regard to Native American women, I mean, we were stunned to find that Native American women were 2-3 times as likely to be beaten and violated, raped, and wondering why that was. And as it turns out, it's because tribal communities, tribal jurisdictions, tribal police have no authority over non-native people to prosecute and to arrest for domestic violence, had no jurisdiction whatsoever on tribal land. And so what we found, and we had testimony from Native women who were telling us that literally their non-native boyfriends or husbands or someone would literally beat them up and call the sheriff on the phone arrogantly to say, now what you gonna do about it? And so we had a very difficult time passing the provisions in the Violence Against Women Act in 2013. Matter of fact, we missed, it was not reauthorized for a whole session because the white men in Congress weren't about to subject white men to the jurisdiction of tribal authorities. They hearkened back to a Supreme Court decision called Oliphant, and so there the struggle began. And that is when I had such an opportunity to meet my Native sisters from all over the country. Of course, we have 11 nations in Wisconsin and, of course, Minnesota. But I had never met Native women with Southern drawls and Boston accents. And so it was really thrilling to see Native women come and do their duties. And I'll just have to say, it's a doggone shame that we elected our very first Native women this past session from Kansas and from New Mexico. And when I first met Deb Holland, I went to campaign for her. And like my first statement to her before she even won the primary was, where the hell have you been? We've been working so hard on these issues. This is a heavy lift. And it is hard work, and we need your help. Where the hell have you been these hundreds of years? And so I'm just glad to be in the fight, and I don't take it for granted. Again, I just would restate what I said in my opening statement that, sovereignty is kind of an empty discussion if you can't even talk about sovereignty over your own body. And Native women, I'm committed to making sure that we get this totally across the finish line. And as you mentioned, it stalled off in the Senate in Mitch McConnell's graveyard with the rest of our bipartisan bills. And, I just think that this speaks volumes to people who are trying to consider who to vote for in 53 days. When you think about what's important to you and who's carrying that mantle, think about all this. Just think about the bills that are in the graveyard.
Yeah. Do you know specifically if that means that the VAWAs that it still are those provisions still intact, or do they just expire if this just doesn't get passed then?
Okay, well, here's the thing. Our bill that we passed really strengthened those provisions, but there are bills in the Senate that don't include them at all. There's one in there that's a mirror of what we did in 2013, but the other one doesn't include protections for tribal members nor LGBTQ members. And, as I stated then, I mean, if this is going to be a Violence Against Women Act, it's got to recognize all women. And, being a lesbian does not stop you from being a victim of domestic violence, we discovered. It does not stop you from needing shelter and protection. And being Native American makes you more likely to be violated, since, a man knows all he has to do is take you out to a bar and drag you back onto tribal land to violate you, and he could just walk away with impunity. So I think that, and then of course, I guess we're going to get to talk about the murdered and Indigenous women as well. this is a problem where we've got 85% of Native American women have been violated in their lives, and we just can no longer just sit silent.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
I have a quick follow-up question, if it's appropriate. Just Representative Moore, do you think that it's helpful for all of us, everyday Americans, to pressure our Congress people, I guess our senators to pass the Violence Against Women Act reauthorization?
Absolutely bug them. I mean, democracy actually works. I mean, we stopped them from ending the Affordable Care Act with action. The VAWA was passed initially because women in the LGBT community and domestic violence advocates converged on the Capitol. This is the only thing that's working right now, because right now we are deadlocked into partisan politics. And I can tell you the only thing that works are people's voices.
Awesome, thanks.
Congresswoman Moore, I'm really glad you brought up the word self-sovereignty. I know Sarah Deer, or Professor Deer, talked about that in the film as well, and that really highlighting the fact that when we talk about sovereignty, that it's not just about the tribes themselves, but it's also the people who live, whether it's on the reservation or in urban areas, that it's our body, our rules. And that leads me to the next question for Lisa. When I think of self-sovereignty, I thought of you, and just how powerful your story and your passion and advocacy is as well. Can you talk about how you became involved as an advocate for Indigenous women in fighting against violence?
Thank you, Janelle, for the question, and thank you for being the moderator, especially if this is your first time. You're doing very well. It feels like I was essentially born into violence, and I grew up, my entire life was living in a very violent home, watching my beautiful Indian woman mother get beaten thousands and thousands of times by a white man. And as a child, I watched from the time I was 4 or 5 years old, I've watched the evolution of law enforcement's response to domestic violence. We've made headway and we've kind of reverted back, and we're kind of like an ocean tide when it comes to this. And it wasn't until my oldest daughter had been victimized as a child, and I left her father, who was an abuser. And to me, I called it the slap of reality, because I was holding my 10-month-old daughter in my arm and he had slapped me across the face. And when he did, of course my face went this way, and I'm looking right into my baby's eyes. And I realized that I had just become my mother and my daughter had just become me. And at that moment, I decided that cycle was going to stop right there, that my daughter would never know the existence of what it's like to live in a home of horrific bloody violence. And so from there, I started getting into the advocacy movement. I started out as a legal advocate for the Mmiw, which is a women's shelter here on White Earth, Indian Reservation, and had been there for some time, and then started working for the Tribal Coalition, which I later became the executive director of. And so that has been our work on the local and national level of responding to domestic violence, to sexual assault of Native American, Alaska Native women, doing public policy work, community education, training, program development, a whole cadre of different things in response to the level of violence that was being committed and unfortunately still is.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Are you involved with the Mmiw task force that's going on in Minnesota currently?
I'm not on the task force at the moment, but I was part of the development of that legislative language. I was very adamant that there had to be Native representation, because at the original viewing of the bill of what was being drafted, we weren't necessarily a focal point. So I was part of the writing of that language, and offering my observations and edits. And so I'm glad to see that it has passed in Minnesota, and it is starting to take some cohesion and taking some steps that are necessary to start really addressing the murdered and missing Indigenous women. We just recently had a young Native woman that had died. Of course, there was suspicion around her death. Unfortunately, what we see in our communities, when we talk, especially in tribal communities, when we look at murder, oftentimes it's being coded as a suicide or something else, and it's not being investigated. There was actually, a few summers ago, a young mom had died, was killed, had died, and the parents were trying to get somebody to investigate because they knew that their daughter wouldn't commit suicide. And granted, we have people who go in denial when suicides and things like that of that nature occur, but they were adamant that this was not her nature. And so they petitioned to our tribe and to our safety director, public safety director at the time. And so he called in the Bureau of Criminal Apprehension, the BCA, to come back in to investigate, only to be called by them a few hours later apologizing, stating that they do not have control of the crime scene. And so unless the county calls them in, they can't come back. They can't come back in to investigate. So, when we think about the multitudes of barriers, not just, when we think about tribe having criminal jurisdiction over non-natives who come onto our lands or who are on our lands, committing these amounts of crimes against us, is definitely one aspect of it. But when we continue to have systemic level of systemic racism and injustice, that continues to lend and support the continuum of the level of violence that we're facing. I mean, if you look at NCIC data of our murdered and missing Indigenous women in 2016 was 5,716 Native women who are murdered and missing, and we're only 0.9% of the total U.S. population. That is significant. I mean, we should be sounding the alarms. I wish someone would help me get us, help get Native people, and particularly women, put on the endangered species list, because maybe something will happen then to really, truly protect us. We got a mini Oliphant fix with Mmiw of 2013. And again, thank you, Gwen Moore, for your voice and your advocacy. But there's so much more work to do. But in the meantime, what other avenues can we be taken to start looking at protecting Native women soundly, both on and off reservation?
Yeah, you brought up a really good point with the numbers, Lisa. We know that's a big part of the issue is data mismanagement. And there were, I don't know the exact number, but it was like 5,760 reports of missing or murdered Indigenous women. Some of those are due to a woman maybe being reported missing more than one time in a year. Some are found, some aren't. So we really don't know how many women truly are missing right now. Mm-hmm. And that's one of the things that I found so astounding in my program when I was going through gathering research, background research and data for my dissertation. I thought, well, how on earth is that possible? How we don't have one database where we can access this information. There are misclassifications of ethnicity and race. Again, you spoke, Lisa, about the issues of, either negligence or mismanagement of some of the cases. It's extremely concerning
Yes.
that this is still happening.
Well, especially with trying to get a response. So I think it was in 2012 or 2013, somewhere in there, I testified against the United States for human rights violations at the Inter-American Commission of Human Rights in DC. And one of the horrifying, resounding theme here for White Earth, and our reservation is 1,300 square miles, and we have 3 county law enforcement agencies and our own tribal law enforcement. So that makes for really quite a muddied water type thing. But one of the things that I testified to, and it was from the women in our community, is that when their daughters went missing, what do? You call 911. That's what we teach our kids. When you're in trouble, you call 911. And only to be told actually 3 different things. 1, why don't you know how to be a mother to know where the hell your daughter is? 2, we have better things to do with our time. And 3, if you're tribal, you need to call tribal, and 911 hangs up. We need to call tribal if we're tribal, so we're not entitled to the same protection as anybody else in the county outside of, that are white, because that's predominantly the population base that's here. So when we have profound things like that occurring, what does that look like? What's the scope of that in the rest of all of the tribes throughout the country? What does that look like in Alaska Native villages? Right?
Well, let me make an intervention here. It's one of the things that I am so amazed about. When you start talking about sovereignty, it's not one thing. It pervades every single area. Mm-hmm. And so when you look at how funds are allocated for roads and transportation, say the police need to come and rescue you. If it's a road leading to a reservation, it may not be paved because you're not going to get the same equities with regard to transportation dollars as a local government might get to do that. And you have dual citizenship as a member of the tribe and also as an American citizen. And same thing with police assets and training. That should not just be a burden of the tribe. In an inequitable kind of way. So, when I said to Deb Howland, where the hell have you been all this time? It's because, what I found Native issues to be is Social Security, healthcare, education, roads, housing. There's no end. And with every single subject matter, whether it's providing interest-free loans for students who go to medical school, except for if you're Native American and you have to pay taxes on that. There are inequities that are just like ribboned all through every single system. And so no matter what committee that Deb and Cherie serve on, there's a whole body of work that is totally dedicated to creating those kinds of equities. It's true. I don't think that that our constitutionally elected officers really understand what sovereignty means. They don't. They don't understand that it means that that these are nations that deserve to be treated with the same sort of equities that you would treat other state and local governments. That's a big fight that's got to be duked out.
Absolutely. Yep, there has to be, because right now we're looking at how we, the food insecurity. We have massive food insecurity here. Of course, COVID has made that exceptionally horrific for the entire country because of lack of employment, being unemployed, all of these different pieces. But the level of what our students, here, because I teach at our tribal college, and what we're seeing, the inequities that they're facing is what I faced 25 years ago. It hasn't changed. We are considered a food desert because of the lack of access to healthy foods, fresh produce, and things of that nature. We are the highest and lowest of everything we do not want to be, of health disparities. We have high rates of poverty and all of these other pieces. And we're in a very rural area, which makes it really quite a challenge for transportation and all of these, these capacities. And then again, just like how you're talking about our road conditions, and it just depends where you're at. how that is. But yes, and sovereignty is about the right to self-determination as well, and being able to protect our lands from, we look at exploitations of predatory economics, coming into our territories, and how do we protect our people at the same time that we're protecting our land. When you think about the human trafficking, the sex trafficking aspect, it's significant. And it depends where your tribe is located, depends on what is the economic seasonal development at that particular time. So we're just getting done with summer. So this was a high, we live in a land of 10,000 lakes. So we have all kinds of people coming up to camp, to fish, to do these things. Then we have in our hunting come October, and we're going to be inundated with a bunch of trigger, unfortunately, a bunch of white men who are trigger happy lunatics. And not to say all of them are, not to lump them all in one bunch, but unfortunately, we see rises in the level of sex trafficking, the level of violence, the level of sexual assaults, all of these different things occurring every time there's a seasonal change and the different activities that come with it.
Mm-hmm. I also wanted to highlight too that we focus quite a bit on issues around jurisdiction and sovereignty, but I just also want to highlight too that our sisters in urban areas, the levels of violence are just as high. And one interesting thing I did find in my research is with the perpetrators, it was about half and half. So about half were Native, half were either Black, white, Puerto Rican, and Latino. So that was a little bit of an interesting finding in regards to the urban areas. But although there weren't the issues of jurisdiction, there were definitely the issues of 911, police not responding with seriousness or with, racism, not taking the call seriously. So that's definitely problematic. There was a question that was highlighted from Facebook, I believe, that someone had asked about the legal issues of violence on the reservation. She said, I thought that currently there are no consequences for people that are not Native. However, in the film, it featured a Native woman who was successful within her tribe of passing consequences if this should happen. Can you explain the current status on these laws?
I can try to take a stab at that, unless Lisa, you think you can answer it better, or what?
I think the commenter is referring to Chelsea Snyder's. I'm
Lauren's
assuming
law.
she's talking about Lauren's law, the anti-trafficking code that Chelsea introduced on the MHA Nation on the Fort Berthold Reservation in North Dakota. That's my assumption.
Yeah.
Well, maybe we can take team on here, Brad. So tribes have the right to self-determination because our tribes do maintain criminal jurisdiction over their own members on our land. And we do have civil jurisdiction over non-Native. So we can issue protection orders, we can issue child protection orders, we can, get them speeding tickets and DNR if they're out, shining deer or something, or fishing when they're not supposed to, what have you. So with Chelsea's law, I do believe was one of just a small handful of tribes that actually developed a code to address human trafficking, and particularly sex trafficking on the reservation. So our tribes can still exercise that, but in a criminal context, there's not much else we can do. If they're non-Native, we can't arrest them, we can't try them in our tribal court systems, anything within that nature. That's when we depend upon, and it depends on what tribe you're in. So if you're in a public law 280 or a non-public law 280, so public law 280 are tribes are under state jurisdiction, non-public law 280 tribes are under federal jurisdiction. And so it just depends on the state in which you're in. that's who you rely on, that the tribes would then defer and rely on to intercede and arrest and hold these non-Native offenders accountable. But unfortunately, with the Government of Accountability Office, what they found in non-public law 280 tribes, that up to like 97% of the sexual assault cases that occurred in Indian country, they declined to prosecute. And that is a resounding theme that we're constantly being addressed with, and that links to, that colonial trauma response of why bother reporting when we know nothing's going to happen, because look what happened to my auntie 20 years ago, look what happened to grandma 50 years ago, look what happened to our great grandmas 100 years ago. So we connect, to our historical aspects of that legacy of violence specifically designed to target our people. You got to remember, there was a time in this country that the United States government paid for the Redskins. So that, so no, that doesn't honor us when teams have us as mascots. And Redskins was used to not just our scalps, but they wanted the back straps, our skin literally cut off our backs, to prove that they killed an Indian, to prove that it was an actual red-skinned Indian. And the United States paid really hefty rewards for that. That I did an analysis of, the cost analysis was over $1,000. And at that time, in those eras, not that long ago, that's an awful lot of money. So we have a huge, long legacy of trying to undo and address the level of racism within a system that was designed never to help us, but to actually, at some point in time, was to exterminate and terminate us. Mm-hmm. So I don't know if you want to talk a bit more about Chelsea's law, Brad, and the context of what, the and how important that success was for her, for their tribe.
No, I mean, Lisa, that was very well put. I mean, I think the only thing I would add to this, and please chime in and correct or add to it, Lisa, is that because of the U.S. government's eroding of tribal sovereignty and removal of jurisdiction, and in fact, there was the Indian Civil Rights Act that was passed 30 or 40 years ago that limits sentencing to now it's a $5,000 fine or a year in jail. But because of all this erosion of jurisdiction and of sovereignty, a lot of tribes have just not maintained their criminal justice or their court system or their law enforcement system. And
because there's no real incentive to, if you have no teeth, you can't really levy a fine. You don't even have a jail. You don't have any money to run anything. There's not really the point to do it.
And Lisa, I mean, tell me if I'm right about this too, but it seems like also some tribes that have maintained a criminal justice system really have taken the Western model for criminal justice, which we all know has patriarchy and racism baked into it. And so one of the things that I love about movements like Chelsea is doing is it's rewriting tribal code, not only for now, and so it can actually be implemented now, but with the hope that as sovereignty is no longer withheld or restored to tribes, there will already be some infrastructure in place for the next steps. I don't know if that seems accurate, but that's my impression.
Yeah, and just a caveat to everything we're saying, it's so complicated. You can't say this is true for one tribe. In fact, when we were interviewing Sarah Deer in the documentary, who's a legal scholar, she was like, you should just have a ticker tape running under the film the whole time saying this is not true for all tribes. She's like, I don't want to get in trouble. So like Lisa was saying, public law 280 tribes, states, of which Minnesota is one of them. North Dakota is not. And we filmed Sisters Rising in mostly North Dakota and Minnesota. North Dakota, if a crime is committed on tribal land and the victim is Native, and the perpetrator is non-Native, then technically a U.S. federal agent is supposed to respond to that crime. However, if you're in a public law 280 state, which is a handful of mostly Western states that were trying to actually terminate tribes, that was the language they used. Yeah, Minnesota is one of them. Unlike North Dakota, if that kind of crime happens, it's the county sheriff or local, it's the state responders who respond. But you see in both cases that there is a lack of response, both from federal agents and from state troopers or sheriffs or whatever. And that the reason for that is very complicated, obviously. And I feel like we barely scratched the surface in our doc, but it's rooted in racism. It's rooted in, Lisa points out that state sheriffs and, state authorities that are who come into contact with tribal people often have a chip on their shoulder against tribal people because of tussles around gaming and fishing, hunting and fishing. And so they're not necessarily in each other's corners, like state troopers and sheriffs might have beef with tribal people. So why are they going to respond to these crimes? And then federal agents often, they don't want to deal with things like rape, domestic violence. They want to do big interstate crime, is what Sarah Deer had explained to us. They kind of like, I don't know, I don't think this is a formal thing within the federal government, but they do tend to send their less successful agents to Indian country to respond to those crimes. So these are agents who are not really on the top of their game, and they don't want to be there anyways. And they don't have like the kind of training to deal with crimes like rape, interpersonal violence. And
can I make a little intervention here?
Yeah, please.
Always going.
And it's just based on some questions that were in the chat. When we put the provisions in 2013 to expand or to create the ability for Native people to prosecute domestic violence on tribal lands, it was a huge victory because you couldn't even do that. And I appreciate the assessment that, a lot of tribal authorities weren't ready to stand it up. They hadn't had jurisdiction over it, so they couldn't really accommodate keeping law enforcement there. So they didn't have a footprint there, but they neither had the authority. One of the things that the Violence Against Women Act bill has in it that's sitting over in the graveyard now are improvements that were made last night, and Deb Holland was part of fixing it up, because the bill that we passed only dealt with domestic violence. So it didn't deal with child abuse or sexual assault or trafficking or the other array of criminal activities. But I do think, that, and I heard what you said, Brad, about some of these tribes have adopted a Western kind of jailing. But I do think that in order to achieve sovereignty, we're going to have to figure out the funding, the will, the tribal agreement to stand up the capacity to do it. You don't want an excuse to be, old buddy got away with raping her because you guys did not have a jail to put him in.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
Oh yeah. Sorry, we were not implying that we are against the provisions for domestic violence.
I know. We the thing is that what I'm saying is that the bill that we need to pass now gives tribes jurisdiction over more than just domestic violence. It's other sorts of sexual crimes and child abuse. So if you were in a situation, we saw situations where man beat up his woman. If there were a stepchild there that tried to jump in and help his mom, and he got beat up, then the law we passed wouldn't necessarily cover that. So, like I said, this is a work in progress. But I think the end result ought to be that we ought to have, tribal authority. So if you do something wrong on the reservation, you're going to jail. I want people to know that if you rape me on the reservation, you're going to jail. That's what I want them to know.
Well, and that's just it. It shouldn't matter where you're at. When I go to New York, when I go to Wisconsin, when I go to California, I am subject to the states and jurisdiction of that state or that territory. I traveled around the world. I am subject to the jurisdiction of that country. It should be no difference that the moment you come onto tribal lands, you should be subject to the jurisdiction of this nation, of this tribe. And it should be, but yet the level of loopholes makes it the perfect predatory hunting ground. And predators are not stupid. They know where they can go and hunt with and rape and murder and be domestic violence, commit that with impunity because the United States granted that to them. When they, in 1978, when they stripped tribes of that criminal jurisdiction. So VAWA was, at the time when this all occurred, it was such a massive victory. It took all of the tribal coalitions through the state, throughout the country, that came together and kind of converged on the National Congress of American Indians. We passed our very first resolution that we wanted to have criminal jurisdiction over non-natives. We needed this, we needed this, we needed this. 10 years later, we took that resolution and went check, check, check. That's significant, that within 10 years, and all of the massive changes and all of the challenges we faced, we succeeded. And now we have to, we had our celebration, now you pick it up and continue to move forward because, as Gwen's saying, is that it only covered domestic violence, dating violence, and violations of order for protections. And the perpetrator had to either live on the reservation or work on a reservation in order for it to apply. So you have a native and non-native, even though that he or she is a member of this tribe, but they live off reservation and they come here for the weekend to stay at the casino and is assaulted, the tribe wouldn't have jurisdiction over that because the perpetrator didn't fit the bill, if you will, for living on a reservation or working on a reservation. But it was a significant start. And some massive tribes did, so you look at Umatilla in Oregon, they did a fantastic job because they created the very first case law. And it's important that these are done right because when case law is developed, then that carries it forward and gives the model, if you will, or the cookie cutter per se on how to do it that efficiently so other tribes can pick it up. So, and you're right, Gwen, our tribes are in different states of having the infrastructures to be able to implement VAWA in its totality. I mean, we look at the Tribal Law and Order Act that passed in 2010 that granted and recognized the authority of tribes to do more in response to those who were committing the crimes and victimization. It increased our sentencing authority from 1 year and or $5,000 fine to 3 years and or $15,000 fine for murder and rape, which still is very, very much below the bar, but it's getting better. But of course, with that, we can stack it up to 9 years and no more than that. But still, a lot of our tribes, even though VAWA did pass, a lot of our tribes don't have the funding per se to be able to develop the infrastructure needed to fully implement both VAWA and LOA.
So just to clarify for anyone who has questions, you're referring to the 2018 version of VAWA, right? That restored some of the jurisdiction to tribes, but only about, I believe, 11 of the 573 tribes have actually
implemented it.
Advantage of that, and that mostly centers around how you have to abide by due process, provide a court
attorney, jury of their peers, and correct me if I'm wrong, Gwen, that was part of their contention within Congress, is that they were worried that tribes having criminal jurisdiction over white men, for example, was that we were gonna get our revenge.
Well, it's just, someone asked the question in the chat, why would people object to it? I mean, change is very, very difficult. And, the Oliphant decision, white men did not want Native people having authority over them. I mean, I can't explain it any better than that. I'm not a white man, but they're used to being in charge. And change is very difficult, but that was the issue. That was the main issue. And then there were other issues too. That same piece of legislation, we expanded protections for LGBTQ women too. So people inserted their own personal views about lesbians and made that a bottom line. Some people did, and immigration status. there were people who were anti-immigrant, and we put provisions in that VAWA bill to protect people so that, you know, we could give some sanctuary to people who were being abused, but were being held hostage by their immigration status. And then people didn't want to do that, you know, and so it's the same knuckle-headed, homophobic, racist sort of attitudes that would have people not wanting, you know, them to have authority. I mean, we give authority to doggone campus police, for God's sake, willing to do that. And so why wouldn't we want to do it to a nation and really provide the funding to develop the training and the infrastructure for them to be able to do it? I mean, if someone commits a crime on tribal land, we don't want to have to wait for the federal law enforcement agency from 500 miles away to come before they can be arrested. You know, I need them to be arrested right then. And that's who I'm a law and order person today. When it comes to this topic, I need them to be arrested right on the spot.
And wasn't there a firearm provision that?
Oh yeah. Oh, that. Thank you for. Yeah. Yep. There was also, oh my God, the smoking gun, to be able to disarm people who have shown a propensity toward domestic violence, taking away people's Second Amendment rights. I have the right to shoot you if I'm a domestic violence violator. I don't want to mean to make it sound silly, but yeah, that set off there were a lot of excuses not to pass that based on that as well.
And the terrifying part to that is, one, you know, if you're going to commit crimes like that, you forfeit your right to fire, I would think. They're like I've had the privilege of traveling through, you know, Belfast, Ireland, and whatnot over the UK. And over there, if you have consistently not paid your parking tickets, they revoke your right to have a gun, which of course you can't carry, but you can have them at their Rotary Club, because you lack the responsibility. If you can't pay your parking tickets, how are you going to be responsible enough to handle a weapon that could kill someone, right? So I think common sense. But the other part is that, and I did this research some time ago, and with domestic violence, and there's domestic violence in the home, having a gun in a home increases that victim's lethality like over 300 and some %. I don't know what that would be now. I would wager it's much higher. But it's you know, how do we look at wagering that the protection of people's lives over somebody's you know, forfeiture of having a weapon for a time being until they can get some help that they need to be responsible human beings. But,
yeah.
Gwen and Lisa, I was also, Sarah was saying at one point how much interest the Koch brothers had opposing VAWA the first time in 2013. And she was mentioning that also, I mean, as these, you know, as violence against the land and violence against women is tied together, she was saying that in addition to white men being afraid of losing power, there's also this corporate interest against giving nation sovereignty, and that they could actually stop pipelines from going through their land.
Yeah.
Which is another way of white men not wanting to give up power. But I was wondering if there's any validity to that as well. And
we, as documentary filmmakers, we are avid documentary watchers. And I've been, you know, 13th by Ava DuVernay, about the 13th Amendment that essentially, well, I don't know if I can quickly summarize her film, but it's about mass incarceration and racism against African Americans. Reference is ALEC, ALEC. And then we just watched this other amazing documentary, Public Trust, about the destruction of public trust land by mostly conservative and corporate interests in the US. And ALEC came up again. And it just seems like, how do we take down ALEC? That's what I want to know. ALEC, how do we take them down? They publish all this shadow legislation that is completely anti-human, anti-women, anti-Indigenous, anti-sovereignty, and anti-environment. And what are we going to do to stop them?
Well, they have a 501c4 status, and we see many blessings and many abuses of our tax law. And the NRA has also abused it. You know, ALEC is an organization, and it has a sister organization, National Organization for Women Legislators. And, you know, legislators from all over the country are able to expend taxpayer dollars to go to these conferences. You know, and we all go to conferences. We come and hear what Native Americans have to say. We hear what people from the domestic violence community have to say. We hear from, you know, interest groups that talk about housing and evictions and, you know, the LULAC and the NAACP, you know, but ALEC hears from manufacturers. I've been to some of their conferences where the luncheon speaker is somebody from the NRA, and the dinner speaker is somebody from the cigarette company, and the breakfast speaker is someone who from the oil company. And I mean, it's just where then the evening reception is put on by some other interest group. And I think that, you know, we believe in the First Amendment. We believe in free speech. I think that that's a whole body of work that needs to be revisited, so that people can't exploit taxpayer dollars for propaganda. And quite frankly, that's what ALEC is. ALEC, they write legislation for state legislators. All of these 3 strikes and you're out. I mean, these kinds of bills are written by people who build prisons. You know, how do we get our prisons filled up? Let's write some legislation like 3 strikes and you're out. So that 3rd strike, you know, no matter how, you know, maybe you punched a guy who was talking to your girlfriend, you know, threw a drink in his face. Well, that's your 3rd strike, and now you're going to be locked up forever. Doesn't make a lot of economic sense, but you know, if I build prisons, private prisons, then that's the kind of legislation that I want you as a legislator to introduce.
Yeah. Well, and they certainly focus on the school to prison pipeline, and they're targeting minority people, which are, you know, statistically are Black relatives, are Native relatives, and other people of color that fill these prisons. But now to look at the level of the, you know, the corporations and the predatory economics that I call it, is that, you know, I testified before Congress, before the Intergovernmental Affairs Office and Homeland Security to the sex trafficking of Native women. And I was asked specifically to testify to the man camps that were occurring in Fort Berthold, you know, and all of the violence that was occurring, especially around the sex trafficking aspect. But I also included Fort Peck because Fort Peck was part of that Bakken oil boom. And I contacted the advocates that were there, and they stated that the level of violence that were occurring had tripled because of these man camps. That, you know, these you know, so there's all kinds of you know, things to look at. And you know, when we look at that predatory economic, when these pipelines come through, or, you know, in this sense, it was all of these fracking wells, right? And it was the most telling part for me, because I wrote a paper on it to help for other tribal coalitions to understand the connection between environmental justice and the safety of our people. And it was that the methodologies of extraction has changed with technology, right? It's improved to some degree, but the mindset of those men coming hasn't changed since the 1800s during the gold rush days in Alaska and in California, and it was about making it rich, hitting it rich, and having entitlement to lands and bodies that were in that vicinity, and as they were in the 1800s. So the level of violence had tripled in these tribal communities because of the man camps coming. And you had man camps that were documented, other man camps that weren't documented. FBI finally came in and set up house, nearby to start responding, because this is a federal jurisdiction for this particular tribe. And so when we see, the influx of all of these man camps, or all of these workers coming in, and granted, it's not to say that they're all bad and violent, but there's enough that makes them a viable threat to any community. And when they do that, not only is it a safety issue, it's a health issue, because now their healthcare systems are overtaxed. The food was off the shelves as soon as it came in. You had people getting killed left and right, whole families being annihilated by these truckers because they're tired, they fell asleep, and they're loaded down with these trucks and hitting these cars with families and wiping them out. So there's all of these other pieces. And then when you have people in rural locations, then you bring in the other predators are starting to look around. So this is where the gangs, they never really had massive amounts of gang activity, but now you have the Vice Lords, you had the Crips, you had all of these different gangs that were now coming here, and the trafficking of women, of children, and of drugs, right? They actually had a drive-through liquor store. I mean, how do you, I mean, I guess getting out or driving through is one thing, but it just lends to, looking at the housing issue, looking at school systems. I mean, they just got inundated all at once with all of these people, and they had no place to go. And that creates a huge, a huge crisis for that little bitty town or for that community in so many different ways. But the violence, like I said, had increased exponentially because of it. And there was no added resources to respond.
So this conversation is so rich. I wish we could have more time, but our hour is up, so we'll have to wind down. And I have to jump off now. So I just want to thank everyone so much for their time and their passion and their energy. And Willow and Brad, you did an amazing job on this film, and it was beautiful. Thank you, Lisa, for your bravery and your advocacy and your energy. And Congresswoman Wen, I'm so happy to meet you, and thank you for everything that you're doing. We need you, so please don't stop advocating. We need you and more women like you. So thank you so much for everything that you're doing. So
yeah, thank you all so much. It was a gift to spend this hour with all of you.
Watch the movie.
Yes. Miigwech, everybody. Miigwech Gwen-Moore for taking the time to join us today. I really appreciate your voice and your presence, and just your dedication and your love for all, for all of humanity, and especially for advocating for us. So, Miigwech.
Thank you, Gwen and Lisa. You both are so powerful and inspiring, and I'm really, really inspired by both of you. So thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Jada.
Thank you, Janelle.
Our quiet rock. And thank you to everyone, the silent audience. That actually, it was really nice to see the comments.
Yeah.
It can be so alienating sometimes in this forum, when we can't see anyone, but it's good to feel your presence. And thank you for watching the film. And thank you to the festival as well.
Yes, thank you to the film festival. Miigwech. Watch the film.
Yeah.
The 2020 Minority Health Film Festival offers a diverse variety of films and events that we just wouldn't be able to offer in the in-person cinema experience. But I think what really makes it unique is the focus not only on public health issues, but the issues that really concern communities of color. If you're looking for a reason to engage or to try it out, this is the perfect time. Just go to mkefilm.org/MHFF